Hello and welcome to the Society with Fatma Shaheen at PTB World. The practice of employing child domestic laborers has become very rampant in Pakistan, and in this regard then it's very pertinent to mention the findings of this report by ILO, which very categorically states that 1 in every 4 households in Pakistan does employ a child, that too within the age bracket of 10 to 14 years. Now, considering that such cases have been on a constant rise, it is very important then to actually talk about root causes of child domestic labor, and this is exactly something that we'll be doing during the course of today's conversation. Overall, we'll be talking about the social menace of child domestic labor as it does exist in the Pakistani society. What is it that, of course, forces people to send their little children to private households to work? How is it that this in turn actually robs them of not only their childhood but also of their basic rights, which of course includes their right to seek an education? In this regard, we'll also be talking about how social inclusion at one end and gender discrimination at the other end also contributes to child domestic labor. We'll be talking about the various laws and policies which do exist in Pakistan so as to regulate this very social evil, and how, of course, over a period of time these laws have proved to be effective. In this regard, we'll also be talking about the very important role of the NCRC, that is the National Commission on the Rights of Child, and how particularly is this commission working so as to monitor and uphold child rights in the country. Last but not the least, we'll also be talking about the need for there to be effective and very timely social integration of those people, of those children especially, who are abused within the quarters or working in private households. All of this today, that too with a very diverse panel. Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Ms. Rabia Sajjad, who's an educationist. Assalamu alaikum ji, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Alongside her, I have Ms. Atika Shuja, who's a legal expert. Assalamu alaikum ji, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And via Zoom link, we'll be joined by Ms. Aisha Raza Farooq, who is the chairperson of National Commission on the Rights of Child. Assalamu alaikum, madam, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
To start the conversation with you, madam, the first question that I would want to put to you is the fact that we understand that the NCRC has been working very diligently so as to monitor and uphold child rights. But when it comes to addressing all the cultural issues, all the socio-cultural norms which do unfortunately surround the issue of child domestic labor, how is it the NCRC is addressing the same?
I think one has to pursue a multi-pronged approach over here. So what the NCRC has done, and the new NCRC Commission has taken office very recently, 3 to 4 months ago only. So in light of the very unfortunate Rizwana case of child domestic labor, where a judge's wife has been accused of hiring an underage child as domestic help, to the kind of torture that has been inflicted on the child is beyond me, really. So in this case, the NCRC right away had drafted a bill to ban and criminalize child domestic labor, to make it non-compoundable and non-bailable, to ensure that the powerful in our country, if they're ever engaged in such crimes, that they don't go scot-free by out of court settlements that we see all the time, and then that they're taken to task by making the crime non-bailable. So I think the first step required is legislation, and then of course we need to change attitudes and behavior out there. We have to work both on the demand side and the supply side. So the commission is very keen that through this bill we've envisaged that we need to of course hold the employers of such underage children accountable, and we need to have punitive measures there in such a law. But on the other hand, I think it's also important that we look at the supply side, at all the families, parents and caregivers who send their underage children without supervision into domestic labor, because these are houses, this is the informal sector, whether these children are working in as domestic help, whether they're working in workshops, whether they're working at brick kilns or in the agricultural sector, is informal sector. It's very difficult to regulate, and thus it is very important that parents also share some of the responsibility and burden here to keep a check on one, not to send the underage children into employment and instead send them to school.
Right, madam. Another thing that I would want you to delve upon, something which you just mentioned, is the fact that the NCRC has been working, and it has, in the process of its working, proposed this very important bill which actually aims to criminalize child domestic labor. So what all does this bill entail, and how particularly does it aim to not only make this offence non-compoundable but also non-bailable too?
Okay, so the bill envisages an amendment to the Pakistan Penal Code. The idea was to ensure that it is applicable across Pakistan. Otherwise, you have in place Domestic Workers Act in Islamabad, in Punjab, which gives a minimum age beyond, under which you cannot employ children even for decent work. So we wanted to bring a law which could immediately be applicable all over. So the law makes, as you said yourself, the employing underage below 18 as domestic labor, non-compoundable, non-bailable, gives a punishment of at least 3 years and goes up to 7 years, but also at the same time holds the employer of such underage domestic help accountable, and the caregivers and the parents. If you take your child, if the child is helping you while you're employed in a house under your direct supervision all the time, it is fair, it is all right. Now, a lot of people have raised some criticism here to say that there's so much poverty out there that people are forced to send their children into labor. And I say there that, if you have large family sizes of 10 children, which is the case in Rizwana's family, then these people are, of course, driven out of poverty, out of sheer necessity to tell their children to, the poverty is used as an excuse really to use children as bread earners here and to earn income for the families. And we want to work at this with communities to change the mindset, to tell people to move towards smaller family sizes, children that they can financially give a good livelihood, education, nutrition to. And of course, in all this, the state has to play the most important role and ensure that, our children get the compulsory right to education as envisaged under Article 25A, and all the rights that the Constitution provides to children here.
Right, madam, your point is noted. And in this regard, it's equally important then to consider not only one, in fact, all of these factors if you want to actually implement all these laws effectively. On which I'll come to you, Ms. Atika, and I would want you to comment on this in the capacity of a legal expert. Now, she has talked about laws which they are proposing, which the NCRC is in the process of bringing forward. But we also understand the fact that Pakistan, as we speak, already does have not one, rather several laws so as to address the issue of child domestic labor. So for the clarification of the audience, what all these laws are about and how effectively do you see them being implemented?
So first of all, if you look into the federal laws, we have the Constitution of Islamic Republic of Pakistan, which is the supreme law of the land. Its Article 11, Clause 3 clearly states that no child below the age of 14 can be employed in a factory, in mines, or any other hazardous employment. Then we have the Factories Act of 1934, which defines a child as a person who has not attained the age of 15 years. And its Section 50 clearly prohibits the employment of such children in factories. Then we also have another federal legislation, that is the Employment of Children Act 1991, which primarily prohibits the employment of children in any sort of occupation, and also it regulates the conditions of employment. Then if you move on to the provincial legislations, specifically to Punjab, all of these prohibit employment of children below the age of 15. And if you look into child domestic laborers, we have two acts that are in force right now. First is the Punjab Domestic Workers Act of 2019, and second is a recent one, that is the Punjab Home-Based Workers Act 2023, which prohibits working of children below the age of 15 as home-based workers.
Right. That's very rightly put by yourself, Ms. Atika, but when we do talk about their particular rights in the event that they are employed, then what are the rights that these various laws give them? Because we also understand that the laws now mandate them to ensure the way they work, that is something which is not dangerous, or that is something which doesn't adversely impact their health.
If you look into the recent law, that is the Punjab Domestic Workers Act of 2019, we see that it has made mandatory upon the employers to enter into a contract with their workers, and that contract shall regulate terms of their employment. This law has also given protection to children, that is specifically in relation to their health. Their health is prioritized, they're given medical leaves, and they be given breaks during work. And additionally, they're also prohibited from engaging into any sort of hazardous employment.
Right, Atika. So all in all, these are the rights that children didn't have before. On which I'll come to you, Madam. Here we must have your educationist perspective too. So when we talk about child domestic labor, we also understand the fact that overall, and this is something on which Ms. Aisha very rightly so pinpointed towards too, that it is a socio-economic evil. So when we do talk about combating it, how important do you feel is education in doing so? Because we have seen that there have been times, unfortunately, where a lot of people have been subjected to abuse during the course of their employment, and that too at the hands of people who are educated. So to what extent do you feel can education be that one factor which can help us offset this vicious cycle of child domestic labor?
Thank you so much, Fatma.
You're welcome.
So, first of all, I would say that education is probably the only thing that can actually help us out here, because the cycle is so strong now that breaking it is sometimes seems like, impossible in our scenario. And Article 25A of our Constitution very clearly says that every child has a right to free and compulsory education.
Right.
Unfortunately, if I look at, and if I just come up with the simplest example, that a maid coming into our household with 10 or 12 children, as Ms. Aisha was also pointing out, large family systems, and how would she feed to her children?
Right.
She has to probably give one of her childs for domestic labor or make him a domestic laborer. And the cycle continues. A maid, daughter becomes a maid, it is coming into the generation. So they do not even have that basic awareness at how education can play an important role. So the general stigma that you hear even in the households, even in the wherever they are working, what will you do? Will you get the education?
Right. But
It's
then,
not
madam,
important.
if we construe this same thing from the viewpoint of the employers, a lot of times we have seen cases which have emerged, they have been attributed to perpetrators who are educated, they come from educated backgrounds. So by that yardstick, do you still feel that it's just education then which can save us, or it is a combination of so many other things? Because if we see educated individuals committing such crimes, then honestly that is so unfortunate and that is extremely sad for us as a society.
In just Rizwana's case, we've seen prestigious judge who's and where we've seen Rizwana getting into trouble because of a very, very highly educated family. So yes, a lot of stigmas need to be taken off now and that can again be done with the help of education, and that too a standardized education for all, because at the moment we have this stigma that the children who are studying in private systems are way higher than, and they do think that they are higher than the other children. So we have to bridge that gap by providing that standardization. And standardization, obviously, it's not just education that's going to play a role.
Right.
A lot of other factors need to come into play. State being the biggest one has to play a very, very important role. We have to provide opportunities. We have to break these cycles. Community needs to play a very important
community
role.
Engagement is very important, because when we do talk about education here, community engagement is something which becomes very important, because you must be remembering in the times of COVID-19, when the vaccination was launched, there were so many myths surrounding the same, and it was only education through community engagement, which also involved religious leaders, that we were actually as a society able to overcome the same. On which, madam, I'll come to you. Here we must take your narrative too. We have spoken about the laws we have in place, we have spoken about the role of education here too, but when it comes to the role of media, what work is NCRC doing so as to ensure people overall, masses generally, they are sensitized about child rights? Because I do remember a few years ago NCRC was very actively running all these media awareness campaigns in collaboration with PEMRA.
So what we've started immediately over the last 1 month is an engagement with celebrities from the field of arts and drama and theater, cinema. And we see prominent child rights activists like Nadia Jamil supporting us here. There's Mawra Hussain, who's just helped us record a message. There's Fawad Khan, who has, and other stars and celebrities, Myra Khan, so that these people are raising their voices, joining us to raise a voice against child domestic labor, and holding, as I said, both employers as well as the parents accountable, and trying to shame such families, whether they're within us, in our families, around in our neighborhoods, we see them on the road, streets, restaurants, that we must call them out. We should shame them. We should boycott them and ensure that they do not hire child domestic labor. So one side, if you can't control the demand side, the supply side, you should control, or vice versa. And if you cut off demand and ensure no family is allowed to, and create the social pressure, does not hire any underage child, then we will be able to tackle this much better. And I must also add here that families say that these children are looked after better in our homes than they are with their own parents. And I'd say, if you're so worried about our children's rights and what they're fed and how they're clothed, then you should sponsor a child instead, pay for their education, send them to school, clothe them better, feed them better, but make sure they do not leave the care of their own parents. There's no substitute to a parent's love. So let them stay with their parents till they're old enough, which is 18 years of age.
Right, madam, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, Atika. Here we must take your narrative too. So when we do talk about ensuring that people do know about their rights, we can't ignore the fact that social media here has a very important role to play, regardless of course, all these electronic media campaigns. So in this regard, how adequately do you feel has social media been doing justice to this role? Because we have seen not one, rather several social causes being talked about on social media. But the question then is that, is the right narrative being set?
So media has a very important role to play in these cases. Media has always helped in such like cases. So the more the media highlights these cases, the more will people be aware of their rights, specifically children. And the more children will be aware of their rights, the more cases will be addressed properly and more deterrence will be created. And after deterrence is created, people will prevent indulging into such like cases.
Right. Madam, but coming towards you, when we do talk about media, we understand the fact over a period of time, a lot of Pakistani dramas, Pakistani documentaries have also been made based on promoting child rights one way or the other. So what more is it, in your opinion, that media can do so as to break the stereotypes which do typically exist around such issues?
Media being the biggest platform at this moment, I think can play a very, very crucial role. And we have seen the power of social media over the years, how it can simply transform or take up the case. And then, we've seen some of the biggest cases being solved with the help of social media. I think that TikTok can be used very, very aptly to promote these type of
Instagram and Twitter as well.
Instagram as well. But TikTok being the most popular one and having access to millions of children at the moment can play a very, very important role.
But if I may add, very important part of today's discussion would also be what could be the possible role of school, what could be the possible role of educationists like yourself, so as to timely identify child domestic labor, because we do see there to be instances where children might be working and they might be going to school too. So would it not then be fair to expect from people like you to timely identify such cases so as to make timely interventions too?
Absolutely, Fatma. Now, first of all, the first and very foremost important thing over here is that we need to develop the capacity of our teachers and reduce the number in our classrooms. There are instances where our numbers go as high as to 180 in a classroom. So definitely a teacher cannot understand or cannot even identify if the child is coming in or not. In an ideal situation, we have less number of students in a classroom. The biggest way is if the child is continuously absent for a few days, that is an alarming thing for a school or for a teacher, that why a child is not coming to school. Secondly, if we see a child coming in continuously being lethargic, not participating in a number of activities, we need to call in the caregivers, the parents, the guardians to where the issue is. But for all of this, in our context, we need to have capacity of our teachers, increase the number of our schools and reduce this grade system that is prevailing in our school systems.
Right, madam. But in addition to that, hair psychiatrists, hair psychologists, they also have a very important role to play, because we have seen in the West, more particularly in America, that whenever children do complain of being harassed, of being bullied, there are medical professionals there in the school so as to be able to actually ascertain the veracity of their complaints. So likewise, why can we not have similar arrangements here in Pakistan, where if somebody complains that they are being forced into child domestic labor, there is somebody who can, number one, not only determine the veracity of their complaints, but also tell them about the way forward. On which I'll come to you, Ms. Aisha. Here it's very important that we also talk about the other child right violation, and we do understand the fact that the NCRC has a mandate to take due notice of the same too. And in this regard, I would categorically want to mention child trafficking, child marriage, and we do understand that some time back the NCRC did put forward claims, rather proposals, so as to amend the laws so as to increase the minimum age of 18 when it comes to getting children married off. So could you please tell us what progress has been made on all these other initiatives? Because largely speaking, whenever we do talk about child domestic labor, at some level or the other, we do see all these issues being very intrinsically linked.
The last commission prepared some great policy briefs. One was on child marriage. There have been others on trafficking also, one on street-connected children. And we're taking the great work of the last commission forward. And vis-a-vis child marriage, we're working very closely with the UN Women, the National Commission on the Status of Women, the National Commission on Human Rights over here. We've undertaken visits to the provinces, and we're having stakeholders meeting with child rights, civil society organizations who are working at different community levels to ensure that the law which is in place right now, of course, as you said, Sindh is the only province that has the Sindh Child Marriage Restraint Act, which restricts both boys and girls aged to 18. All other provinces and Islamabad follow your old law, under which the minimum age for a girl child is 16, for a boy it is 18 years. And recommendations from the NCRC have already been shared with respective governments, and I believe that amendments to their own respective acts are ready and lying, and in Punjab and in KP at least, waiting for new assemblies to come in place before they are shared and put before the assemblies, provincial assemblies there. But I think legislation is, of course, key here. Yet we see, and I've been recently to a convention, a SARC regional convention, where child marriage was discussed. And it's interesting to see that Bangladesh has a national law which restricts child marriage to 18 years for both boys and girls. And yet, in this region, Bangladesh has the highest incidence of child marriage.
Right.
We have in Sindh the minimum age increased to 18, and we still see underage getting married. So I do think we need to work at enforcement in a better way, and that's where the Commission is looking into proactively following up birth registration. When you improve birth registration,
Right.
and you train and ensure that your nikah khawans and nikah registrars will look at the ID cards and then put down the age of the brides,
That's
the
right.
girls getting married, it will help to implement and enforce laws much better. And then you have punitive measures there. If it's not being followed, then you punish the people who are doing such nikahs of underage girls here.
That's very rightly put by yourself, because we do have laws now in place which actually penalize the nikah khawaz if they do end up entering the wrong details in the nikah nama. But another issue that I would want you to further deliberate upon is that of child beggary. Now we all understand the fact that child beggary is a very pertinent, rather very pressing human rights issue when it comes to ensuring child rights. So in this regard particularly, could you please tell us that what work has NCRC been doing, be it with regards to having the right policies so as to curtail this social issue, or for that matter even effectively working with other stakeholders like the Child Welfare Protection Bureau?
Certainly. And if you are aware, there's a child labor survey that's underway in the entire country. Punjab and Gilgit-Baltistan's results have been notified and they've been compiled. And it's interesting to see, I was a part of the ILO's launch, of one particular study launch, and they shared with us that when parents are asked as to why they are not sending their children to school when education is free, and yet forcing them into beggary or sending them to workshops, underage children, to work. They complain that, despite finishing high school, which a child would if he is sent to school, he or she at the end of the day is not able to earn much for them. And thus they'd rather prefer that this child is forced to or left to beg on the road and is able to earn 4,000 rupees per day. And that is a big contribution towards the household income. And we're working very closely with, as you know, mandate is not execution. Our mandate is just policy and advice and recommendation to respective provincial governments, federal governments, government authorities. And we're working very closely with the child protection authorities in the provinces, as well as the Child Protection Welfare Bureau in Punjab. And Sara is doing a good job there. And it is their mandate really to go and pick up, give refuge to and rehabilitation to street children, orphanages, orphaned, abandoned, and so forth. But many times, the chairperson of the commission has shared with us that when they bring such children to their shelter homes, it is such a mafia. It's these parents who are behind them, and they come and they take custody of the same children back. So yes, we are looking into how we can formulate policies and laws here to check child beggary. It also falls under internal trafficking. Many a times you see that these children have commuted or they've traveled from one province to the other and brought here for street, for beggary, etc. There's sometimes refugee children also. So we're working with SSDO to look into policy, and we are giving recommendations to the governments to check this very, very proactively.
At the end of the day, if we are very serious about addressing child domestic labor, then these are also the issues that we do need to seriously work upon, on which I'll come to you, madam. So we spoke about various other issues, be it that of child marriage, be it that of child trafficking, even child beggary, which we do understand that one way or the other do interrelate with the child domestic labor. So as an accomplished educationist in your own right, what kind of curriculum modifications do you feel we need to make today so as to address all these issues?
Fatma, most of the time our children are not even aware that they are victims or they are part of any child abuse. So raising that awareness and bringing in a curriculum which is fast paced, accelerated, which is not actually based on particular subjects or disciplines, rather is designed around the social evils and telling the children how to combat them and how to develop this defense mechanism around that. And in this regard, there are a few donor organizations who are working in collaboration with Pakistani government in coming up with a program that is specifically for out of school children or children who are actually in one way or the other being part of child labor or being the victims of child labor.
That's very rightly put by yourself, because we have seen the curriculum being modified over a period of time, be it in terms of adding chapters on animal welfare, on life skill based education, or for that matter even chapters on domestic violence. Coming towards you, Atika, here we must also of course talk about the very pivotal role of the Pakistani judiciary with regards to upholding child domestic labor rights. And in this regard, we've seen not one, rather several judgments coming forward. So for the clarification of the audience, could you tell us more about these judgments? What kind of principles did they set down, and why should we as a society consider them to be historic?
So judiciary has always had a very important role in such regard. It has always upheld human rights cases, specifically child protection, child labor cases. Judiciary can help effective implementation of the legislation that is already in field and conduct rigorous trials of such cases and punish offenders so that a deterrence is created, so that we're less likely to come up with such cases. So if we look into the landmark judgments, the famous cases that have set out a precedent and has created history is the Taiba case that is back in 2018, where a 10-year-old minor girl was subjected to severe physical violence and torture. In this case, the Honorable Superior Courts subjected her employers to imprisonment. And apart from this case, we have a lot of other cases, including Humaira's case, Banu's case, and Usma Bibi's case, where these are those cases that have made headlines. But there are so many other cases that do not surface the very top.
So these are the cases, are the ones which made the headlines. I'm sure there must be many other cases which go unreported, on which I'll come to you, madam. And coming towards the end of the show, a very important aspect of today's conversation is working towards changing our typical societal mindsets. The show is about the society. This issue, as we understand, does emanate from the society at large. So what is it that you propose that we need to actively work upon so as to let go social evils like these? Because as a society, unfortunately, we have become very complacent with child domestic labor. We unfortunately normalize it. We unfortunately normalize abuse, which does happen within the contours of child domestic laborers. So what are the changes that we need to make when it comes to our own societal attitudes?
I think, Fatma, very importantly, everybody over here has to play a role. You, me, sitting here, Atika, everyone in the society. We see people around us bringing in their kids with those small little, like, you know, they call them nannies, they call them, like, you know, the caretaker of their child, whosoever is there. We need to raise our voices about it. We have to continuously educate our children about it. We have to have this awareness within our maids as well. So everybody has to play a role. State being the most powerful entity has to definitely play a role, and education being the most important tool over here has to play this positive role. And again, this is something which we cannot break in a day or two. It will take years to break stigma down.
That's very rightly put by yourself, madam, because when we do ideally strive to do away with this social evil, it's not just one person, rather it's the whole society at large which actively should ideally strive to combat the same. On which I'll come to you, Ms. Atika, and before we conclude today's show, so what would your proposals then be for more effective law implementation? Because it doesn't matter how many laws we have in place, what actually matters is that they are timely and effectively enforced.
So for implementation of these laws, it is very essential that children be given basic right to education so that they're well aware of their rights, because education is the key solution to any societal evil. Secondly, we must ensure there are reliable resources available to these labor inspectorates and law reforming agencies that deal with such cases and monitor them. Then we also need to have that communication gap between the stakeholders filled. In addition to this, I think we need to have more stronger legislations that specifically lay out laws for punishment of child offenders, and this child domestic labor must be banned from the courts, and the policies for protection of children must be implemented thoroughly.
Right, Atika, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, madam. And before we conclude today's show, here it's equally important that we also address the rehabilitation angle of today's debate. So what particularly is it that the NCRC is doing with regards to ensuring child domestic laborers, especially those who are subjected to violence, how are they then reintegrated back into the society? Are there any policies in place that the NCRC is working on in this regard, or is it offering some kind of a social support, or for that matter even ensuring there's a requisite and of course effective coordination amongst the stakeholders so as to address this very issue?
To be very honest, because we've just come in the new commission the last 3 to 4 months only, we are going to look at rehabilitation, how you integrate such children who've been abused, whether at home or outside, back into the society through, you know, sending them to school, educating them, making sure they have access to therapists, look into their mental and physical health. So the commission has not yet made any policy on that end, but going forward, as you know, we have a 3-year tenure. That's something we have on our agenda that we are going to look into. But I am aware that the Child Protection Welfare Bureau Punjab does look into and give access to children who are given shelter in their homes to pay attention to a child. You know, they make therapists accessible to look into and assess their mental health and physical health. But yes, there is a lot more to be done, and we'll certainly keep that in mind going forward.
Right, madam, your point is noted. On which note, I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, Ms. Rabia. Thank you so much, Ms. Atika, and thank you so much, Ms. Aisha.
Thank you.
Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about this pressing social evil of child domestic labor. We also spoke about the various laws and policies that we have in place so as to categorically address it. We also spoke about the need for there to be effective implementation. By large, we as a society need to not only sensitize ourselves about child rights, but we also need to ensure that we give our children a future, an environment which is not only nurturing for themselves, but also one which, of course, protects their right to dignity and privacy too. On that note, signing off for today. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.